What happens when a legendary actor sits down for what should be a simple morning chat, only to face an onslaught of disrespect that would make anyone's blood boil? It only took 49 seconds for one of Britain's most respected stars to do something absolutely unthinkable on live television. Michael Caine walked onto the set that morning, expecting a pleasant conversation. The cameras were rolling, the studio audience was settling in, and Lorraine Kelly sat behind her desk with that familiar smile plastered across her face. Beside her were two other panelists: Richard, a entertainment journalist who never missed an opportunity to stir the pot, and Emma, a lifestyle blogger who seemed more interested in her phone than the actual show. The applause died down as Michael took his seat. He looked relaxed, wearing a crisp navy suit, his signature glasses perched on his nose. This was supposed to be about his latest project, a new audiobook where he narrated classic British literature. Simple stuff, easy conversation, but Lorraine had other plans. "Michael Caine, everyone," she announced, her voice dripping with a strange sort of condescension that immediately set an odd tone. "The man who talks for a living." Michael smiled politely, choosing to ignore the jab. "Well, I suppose that's one way to put it." "So," Lorraine continued, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority, "you're doing audiobooks now. Is that what happens when the film offers dry up?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension immediately. Richard's eyes widened slightly, and even Emma looked up from her phone. Michael's smile remained, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "I'm doing audiobooks because I love literature and I love sharing stories. The same reason I've done anything in my career." Right, Lorraine said, waving her hand dismissively. "But let's be honest, Michael. You're 80 years old. Surely you're past your prime. This is just a way to stay relevant, isn't it?" The disrespect was palpable. Here was a man who had won 2 Academy Awards, who had worked with the greatest directors in cinema history, and he was being talked to like some desperate has been. Michael shifted in his seat. "I don't think age has anything to do with relevance, Lorraine. Some of the best work comes from experience." "Does it, though?" Lorraine shot back, and there was something almost gleeful in her tone. "I mean, when was the last time you were in anything people actually talked about? What was it? The Dark Knight? That was years ago." Richard jumped in, clearly sensing where this was going and wanting to be part of it. "She has a point, Michael. The industry has moved on. Maybe it's time to accept that your era is over." Michael turned to look at Richard, his expression calm but his jaw set. "My era, as you call it, lasted longer than most people's entire careers. I'm quite comfortable with what I've accomplished." "But that's the thing," Emma chimed in, finally putting her phone down. "You're living in the past. Nobody cares about old Hollywood anymore. It's all about streaming now, social media stars, influencers. You're from a different generation." "A different generation that actually learned the craft," Michael responded, his voice still measured but with an edge now. "A generation that respected the work and the audience." Lorraine laughed, actually laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "Oh, please don't give us the whole back in my day speech. It's boring, Michael. Just admit that you're doing audiobooks because nobody wants to cast you anymore." The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. This had gone from an interview to an attack. "I'm doing audiobooks," Michael said slowly, carefully, "because I was asked to. Because publishers thought I would do a good job. Because people want to hear these stories." "People or old people?" Richard said with a smirk. "Let's face it, your audience is dying off. Literally." That was the line. You could see it in Michael's face. The professionalism he'd maintained for decades. The grace under pressure. It was being tested in a way it rarely had been. "That's a disgusting thing to say," Michael said quietly. "Is it?" Lorraine leaned forward now, sensing blood in the water. "Or is it just honest? You're here promoting something nobody under 50 will care about. Your films are old. Your style is old. You're old. Why should anyone tune in to hear you read books when they can just read them themselves or listen to someone younger, more dynamic? More dynamic, Michael repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. You mean someone who will put on a show, do funny voices, treat literature like it's a performance rather than a story worth telling? Yes, exactly, Lorraine said, completely missing or ignoring his point. Entertainment, Michael. That's what people want, not some monotone narration from someone who sounds like he's falling asleep. Have you actually listened to any of my audiobooks? Michael asked. I don't need to, Lorraine replied with a shrug. I can imagine. So you're criticizing work you haven't experienced. You're making judgments based on assumptions and your own apparent ageism. It's not ageism, Emma interjected. It's realism. The market has changed. Audiences have changed. You haven't. Michael turned to her. I've been adapting my entire career. I've worked in every decade since the 1950s. I've done kitchen sink dramas, blockbusters, independent films, theater, and yes, now audiobooks. That's called range. That's called versatility. Or desperation, Richard muttered, but loud enough for everyone to hear. What did you say? Michael asked, his voice sharp now. I said it could be seen as desperation, Richard repeated, louder this time, emboldened by Lorraine's clear approval. Jumping from one thing to another, trying to stay in the spotlight. That's what actors do, Michael said. We work. We take on different projects. We challenge ourselves. What do you do exactly? Sit here and tear down people who've actually accomplished something? Oh, here we go, Lorraine said with an exaggerated eye roll. The defensive legend can't handle a little honest criticism. Criticism? Michael's voice rose slightly. Is that what you call this? I came here thinking we'd have a conversation about literature, about storytelling, about the craft of narration. Instead, I'm being ambushed by three people who seem more interested in insulting me than actually discussing anything of substance. We're just asking the tough questions, Lorraine said, her smile never wavering. That's what good journalism is. Good journalism, Michael repeated, almost laughing now, but without any humor. Good journalism is research. It's preparation. It's respect for your subject. This is none of those things. Maybe you're just not used to being challenged, Emma suggested. Maybe everyone's been too nice to you for too long, and you can't handle being treated like everyone else. Treated like everyone else? Michael's eyebrows shot up. You mean insulted, dismissed, and mocked? Is that how you treat all your guests? Only the ones who deserve it, Richard said with a nasty grin. That was when Michael stood up. Not suddenly, not dramatically at first. He simply rose from his chair with the same dignity he'd carried throughout his entire career. Where are you going? Lorraine asked, and for the first time there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. We're in the middle of an interview. No, Michael said calmly, reaching up to remove his microphone. You're in the middle of an ambush. I'm in the middle of leaving. You can't just walk off, Lorraine said, and now she was standing too. We have 7 more minutes of segment time. Then I suggest you fill it with something other than petty insults and ageist nonsense, Michael replied, carefully placing his microphone on the chair. This is incredibly unprofessional, Emma said. Michael turned to look at her, and his stare was withering. You want to talk about professionalism? You've been on your phone for half this interview. Richard over there has contributed nothing but snide remarks. And you, he turned back to Lorraine, you invited me here under false pretenses. You told my agent this would be a respectful conversation about my audiobook work. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to humiliate me. That's not what this was, Lorraine protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what was it? Michael challenged. Enlighten me. What was the point of all this? Lorraine opened her mouth, closed it, Then tried again. We were just trying to have an honest conversation about your career. My career doesn't need your validation, Michael said simply. I've had a career that most people would kill for. I've worked with the best, I've won the highest awards, and I've earned the respect of my peers. What I don't need is to sit here and be disrespected by people who mistake cruelty for honesty. We weren't being cruel, Richard said weakly. You told me my audience was dying off, Michael reminded him. You implied I was desperate. You mocked my work without ever experiencing it. If that's not cruelty, I'd hate to see what you consider mean. The audience was starting to murmur now. Some people were nodding. Others looked uncomfortable. A few were pulling out their phones, no doubt recording or texting about what they were witnessing. Michael, please, Lorraine said, and there was a pleading quality to her voice now. Sit back down. Let's start over. Start over? Michael shook his head. Why would I do that? So you can insult me in a different way? So you can find new angles to attack? No, thank you. You're being oversensitive, Emma tried. We were just having a discussion. A discussion involves multiple viewpoints being respected, Michael countered. This was a coordinated attack. You all seem to have the same agenda, the same talking points. Did you plan this? Did you sit in some meeting and decide today was the day you'd try to take down Michael Caine? The silence that followed was deafening. Lorraine's face had gone slightly red. Richard was staring at his notes. Emma had picked her phone back up like a shield. I don't need to be here, Michael said finally. I don't need this show. I don't need your approval. And I certainly don't need your disrespect. I've been in this industry for over 60 years. I've seen trends come and go. I've watched hosts rise and fall. And I've learned one very important lesson. Never let anyone treat you as less than you are. We weren't, Lorraine started, but Michael held up his hand. You were. You did. And now, I'm leaving. He turned toward the exit. This will be all over the news, Richard called after him, as if it was a threat. Michael paused, turned back one last time. Good. Let people see what passes for journalism these days. Let them see how guests are treated when they come here in good faith. Let them judge for themselves. You're making a huge mistake, Lorraine said, her voice harder now, the pleading gone. Walking off my show like this. The only mistake I made, Michael replied, was agreeing to come here in the first place. He looked at each of them in turn. You know what the sad thing is? You could have had a wonderful conversation. I could have told you about the books I'm narrating, about why I chose them, about the process of bringing literature to life through voice alone. I could have shared stories from my career, insights into acting, thoughts on storytelling. Instead, you chose this. You chose to be small and mean and petty. We're not the ones walking off in a huff, Emma said defensively. No, you're the ones who will sit here and try to justify your behavior to your audience, Michael said. You're the ones who will have to explain why you thought it was acceptable to treat someone this way. I'm just the one with enough self-respect to say, no thank you. Fine, Lorraine said, her face now fully flushed with what looked like anger and embarrassment mixed together. Go. We don't need you anyway. Clearly you did, Michael observed. Otherwise you wouldn't have invited me. But you needed a version of me that would sit here and take your abuse. You needed someone who would play along with your little game. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not that person. He began walking toward the exit again. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was watching in stunned silence. Some people looked sympathetic. Others looked shocked. A few looked like they wanted to applaud, but weren't sure if they should. Your agent will be hearing from our lawyers, Lorraine called after him, a last-ditch attempt at maintaining control. Michael stopped one more time, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the studio. Let them call. I'll be happy to explain why I left. I'll be happy to share exactly what was said here today. And I think any reasonable person will understand. You signed a contract, Richard added, trying to sound authoritative. I signed a contract for an interview, Michael corrected. Not for a public humiliation. There's a difference. And if your lawyers can't see that, then I feel sorry for them. With that, he walked off the stage. His footsteps echoed in the quiet studio. No one stopped him. The security guards by the door actually stepped aside, one of them giving him a respectful nod. Back on the set, Lorraine stood frozen. Richard was shuffling his papers nervously. Emma had gone back to her phone, probably checking social media to see if this was trending yet. "Well," Lorraine finally said, trying to regain her composure and her smile. That was unexpected. The audience didn't respond. The energy in the room had completely shifted. "Let's take a quick break," Lorraine said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "We'll be right back." As soon as the cameras cut, the studio erupted in whispers. People were talking over each other, pulling out phones, shaking their heads. And somewhere in the hallway, Michael Caine was probably already in his car, having handled the situation with exactly the kind of class and dignity that had defined his entire career. The thing about respect is that it has to go both ways. You can't demand it while refusing to give it. You can't invite someone onto your show and then spend the entire time trying to tear them down. And you certainly can't expect someone with decades of experience and success to sit there and accept being treated like they're worthless. Lorraine had wanted to make a moment, to create some viral content, to show how tough and uncompromising she could be. What she'd actually done was reveal her own insecurities, her need to belittle someone else to feel important, her willingness to sacrifice basic human decency for what she thought would be good television. Richard had jumped on the bandwagon, eager to be part of the cool kids, to show that he too could be cutting and harsh. All he'd really shown was his lack of original thought and his willingness to punch down at someone who'd achieved more than he ever would. Emma had been perhaps the most disappointing. She'd sat there, largely disengaged, only perking up to add her own little barbs. She represented a generation that claimed to value authenticity and respect, yet she'd shown neither. And Michael? Michael had done what anyone with self-respect should do. He'd given them a chance. He'd tried to steer the conversation back to substance. He'd remained calm and measured, even as the insults piled up. But when it became clear that this wasn't going to be a conversation, that it was just an exercise in cruelty dressed up as journalism, he'd walked away. There's power in walking away. There's strength in saying no. This isn't acceptable. I don't have to tolerate this. Too often people feel trapped by social conventions, by the expectation that you have to sit through anything, endure any insult, accept any treatment because walking away would be rude or unprofessional. But what's really unprofessional is treating your guests with contempt. What's really rude is inviting someone to share their work and then spending the entire time mocking them. What's really unacceptable is using your platform to bully someone instead of having a genuine conversation. The studio audience knew it. You could see it in their faces, hear it in their silence. They'd come expecting a fun morning show, light entertainment, maybe some interesting stories. Instead, they'd witnessed something uncomfortable and mean-spirited. They'd watched as three people ganged up on one, as ageism was displayed openly, as someone's life work was dismissed without consideration. And then they'd watched as that person, with grace and dignity, had said enough, had drawn a line, had shown that there are some things more important than being polite, more important than fulfilling a contract, more important than good publicity. Self-respect is one of those things. As Michael walked out of that studio, he wasn't running away. He wasn't throwing a tantrum. He was making a statement. I am worth more than this. My time is worth more than this. My career is worth more than this. And I refuse to participate in my own degradation. It's a lesson that everyone watching could learn from. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you'll get more of it. If you sit there and take it, people will assume it's okay. But if you stand up, if you speak out, if you walk away when necessary, you send a clear message. I matter. My dignity matters. And I won't compromise on that. Lorraine had underestimated him. She'd thought that because he was older, because he was British and polite, because he'd agreed to come on the show, that he would just sit there and take whatever she dished out. She'd miscalculated badly. Richard had thought he could score points by joining in, by showing how clever and cutting he could be. All he'd done was show his own lack of character. Emma had thought she could be dismissive and superior, representing the new generation looking down on the old. She'd only revealed her own shallowness. They'd all forgotten something crucial. Michael Caine had been in situations far more challenging than a morning talk show. He'd performed Shakespeare on stage. He'd worked with directors who were perfectionists and demanding. He'd navigated an industry known for its cruelty and fickleness. He'd built a career that spanned generations. A few mean comments from a talk show host and her sidekicks. That wasn't going to break him. That wasn't even going to bend him. What it did do was show everyone watching exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. It stripped away the veneer of friendliness and professionalism to reveal something uglier underneath. And in doing so, it made Michael's decision to leave not just understandable, but admirable. The interview that was supposed to be 7 minutes long had barely made it to 3 before everything fell apart. But in those 3 minutes, more truth had been revealed than in hours of typical talk show conversations. Truth about respect, about how we treat people, about what we value as a society. Do we value experience and achievement? Or do we dismiss them as irrelevant because they're not new? Do we treat people with basic human decency? Or do we think that entertainment value justifies cruelty? Do we listen to what people have to say? Or do we just wait for our turn to attack? These are questions that go far beyond one interview on one show. They speak to larger issues about how we conduct ourselves, how we treat each other, how we decide what matters. Michael Caine's walk-off wasn't just about him being insulted. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying some things are not acceptable. It was about refusing to normalize behavior that should never be normal. It was about showing that you can be successful and gracious and still have boundaries that you won't allow people to cross. The cameras had captured it all. The initial jabs, the escalating rudeness, Michael's patient attempts to redirect, his calm responses even as the attacks became more personal, his decision to stand, his careful removal of the microphone, his measured words explaining exactly why he was leaving, and finally, his dignified exit. It would be talked about for days, weeks, maybe longer. People would analyze it, debate it, share it. Some would say he was thin-skinned, couldn't take criticism, but most would see it for what it was. A person refusing to be disrespected, a professional refusing to participate in his own ambush, a human being asserting their worth. Because that's what it comes down to, really. Worth. Value. The understanding that everyone deserves to be treated with basic respect, regardless of their age, their current projects, or whether they fit someone's idea of what's relevant. Michael Caine knew his worth. 60-plus years in the industry had taught him that. Countless films, awards, accolades, the respect of his peers, the love of audiences worldwide. These things had reinforced it. So when 3 people who'd accomplished a fraction of what he had tried to make him feel small, tried to make him feel irrelevant, tried to make him feel like he should be grateful just to be there, he knew better. He knew he didn't need them. He knew his work spoke for itself. He knew that walking away with dignity was worth more than sitting there and enduring abuse for the sake of publicity. And so he walked, one foot in front of the other, out of the studio, away from the cameras, into his car, and presumably on with his day, leaving behind a mess of Lorraine's making. Back on that set, they had to figure out how to fill the rest of the show. They had to deal with an audience that had just witnessed something deeply uncomfortable. They had to face the fact that their ambush had backfired spectacularly. Because Michael Caine walking off their show wasn't a failure on his part. It was a failure on theirs. A failure of basic human decency. A failure of journalistic integrity. A failure to understand that being provocative isn't the same as being smart. That being harsh isn't the same as being honest. That creating conflict isn't the same as creating content worth watching. They'd wanted a moment. They'd gotten one. Just not the kind they'd hoped for. Instead of Michael Caine looking foolish or defensive, instead of him stumbling over their tough questions, instead of them looking like hard-hitting journalists, they'd revealed themselves as bullies. Plain and simple. And Michael had shown what real star quality looks like. Not the ability to sit in a chair and smile for cameras. Not the willingness to promote your latest project no matter what. But the strength to know when something isn't right. The courage to say so. And the dignity to remove yourself from a bad situation. That's what makes someone a legend. Not just their talent. Though Michael had that in spades. Not just their longevity, though his career had certainly proven his staying power, but their character, their values, their refusal to compromise on what matters. In 49 seconds, everything had changed. In 49 seconds, a routine morning show interview had become something else entirely. In 49 seconds, lines had been drawn, positions had been taken, and a choice had been made. Lorraine had chosen to be cruel. Richard had chosen to follow her lead. Emma had chosen to pile on. And Michael Caine had chosen to leave. History would remember which choice was the right one.